Hi, everyone, and welcome to Fabric Frenzy, your monthly source of news, spotlights, and more, all around Fabric and Power BI and everything in between. Today, I have here in the studio, I have Jan, my great colleague, who is here to talk about some exciting new things. Yeah.
Excited and glad to be here.
Glad to have you. So today, we'll go through the news around Fabric and Power BI. And we also, of course, have a monthly spotlight. And today that spotlight is shined upon Fabric Warehouse, and especially some of the new things that we can do with the warehouse in Fabric.
Yep.
So that will be interesting. So before we start, if we have any viewers here who are new to Fabric, who either come from a Power BI background or an Azure Synapse or some other data platform, and is a little bit confused what Fabric even is, I'll just sum it up shortly. So Fabric is the new end-to-end data platform from Microsoft, stitching together all the known and true and trusted experiences that we've been used to from Data Factory, from Azure Synapse, and from Power BI, alongside with a brand new offer called Data Activator, supposed to help us make take action on the output of our data. And all of these things are combined into a unified platform, which is web-based, it's a software as a service, it's easy and approachable, and it really gives the power of end-to-end data pipelines back in the hands of everyday users, but with the added governance of centralized governed systems. So a really great offering for anyone who's looking into building a new data platform or who's looking into the future of what their future data platform should be.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exciting.
Which is probably also why some of these impartial evaluators have ranked Microsoft extremely high on the most recent Forrester Wave. Fabric, Power BI, and Synapse together is such a powerful mix of tools. So that should probably clarify the most basics for new people. So what are the new things? What are the new things here in August? And we didn't have a Fabric Frenzy in July. It was vacation time.
Yep.
So we're also covering some of that. And what did we get? We got XML write support for direct lake datasets. We got warehouse sharing and more. We got Git integration, warehouse upgrades, and we got capacity metrics in Fabric. And let's get started. What does this even mean? We'll go through all of these news. And of course, it was a big month for news in Fabric. I mean, after moving from Power BI to also covering Fabric, of course, each of the individual experiences in Fabric have their own set of news. So there's just been so many news. So we've tried our best to curate the most important ones, but also the ones that are related to our spotlight of the week, which is the warehouse. So let's start with the warehouse and the upgrades that it has gotten. First of all, and the one I'm most excited about today, is the dbt support for Fabric Data Warehouse, which is also what my colleague Jan will show you just a bit later. We'll show you how dbt can really help with creating better enhanced transformations in a data warehouse in Microsoft Fabric. But we also got some quality of life upgrades. We got automatic updates for statistics. So if we just went back a few months, we would have to update the statistics in our SQL manually. But right now it is updating automatically every time we load in data and every time we query data. It is just kept updated, which means we don't have to care about this. And which also brings us closer to what we're used to from a classical SQL server and SQL database. Then we got the update from and delete from T-SQL. So we're getting closer and closer to parity with being able to do all the SQL commands that we have from a SQL server, and also being able to do those in the warehouse. And we are very close to have full parity. A colleague Brian and I tested out some of the features, and he found out we can even do recursive CTEs, we can do CTEs, we can do window functions, we can do most things in the Fabric warehouse that we expect from T-SQL, There are only a few limitations left. We cannot do nvarchar data type, and we cannot do truncate, and there's a few smaller things as well. But the most important things are there, and we just hope we'll get truncate also in the near time. Then we have some optimizations in the data movement during query executions. It's a fancy way of saying queries will run faster, and we don't actually see this component, what it actually does. It's just, I mean, they change something backend, things are going faster. And it is going faster. A colleague of mine went to Sweden last weekend and actually talked about comparing the new Fabric warehouse compared to the old SQL serverless, and found out that it is indeed faster on almost all types of queries, and especially around big data and big amounts of data. So it's definitely not a small-scale solution. It's a full-fledged SQL solution. Finally, we got the opportunity to use Dataflow's Gen 2 with using the warehouse as a source. So that opens up for doing our transformations with Dataflows, get it from the warehouse and store it back into the warehouse, making a combination of warehouse and Dataflow and new viable options for a simple, easy-to-use architecture. Then we finally got zero-copy table clones, which is a feature where we can copy a table in its current state, and it's not actually copying the data, but just pointing back to the same data at the core, which is residing in a data lake. And finally, we got data warehouse sharing, which enables us to share a warehouse with individual people, internally or externally. And we can give different degrees of permissions. We can allow people to read data using SQL. We can allow people to read the data using Apache Spark. Or finally, we can allow people to build Power BI reports on the data set that's connected to our warehouse. Later, we of course also hope to get an even finer granularity, something like row-level security, something like more granular controls. But for now, at least, we are able to share one data warehouse without having to invite people into our Fabric workspaces. A really great feature there, much needed. And it's not only for warehouses. If we look at the pictures here, you'll actually see that for Lakehouse, there's a similar option. And even for the KQL real-time query set, you can also share it with your organization or with specific people. And it has different permission sets, but it's open up to be able to share. Another thing, which is actually not a new thing, but it's important to emphasize that we can do this, is the capacity metrics app. So there's an app already there in Fabric ready for you to use. So if you have a Fabric capacity, you actually already can check what kind of consumption does your different artifacts and jobs use, and if you're hitting some sort of limit, and you can monitor that, govern it, and administer it. So very, very neat. And then we have Git integration. I know that's something you care about also a lot, Jan.
I think a lot of developers has been looking forward to this.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, of course, we need to be able to have versioning and repositories around our objects and around the changes that we're making in Fabric for it to be a viable pro developer tool. And with this recent Git integration, I think we got a very big step towards that goal. Currently, we can connect to Git with Azure DevOps, and that's so far. But I could imagine that GitHub could be under, I mean, I would assume so. Then we have XML write support for Direct Lake. So in Fabric, we got the new data load method called Direct Lake, which lets our dataset connect to our lakehouses directly without having to create an intermediate dataset that needs to be imported or without having to use direct query. And the promise was with Direct Lake that we would get the performance of an import dataset, but with the real-timeness of a direct query. So the best of both worlds. And it's really looking promising so far. But what we haven't been able to do so far is to use the XML write point to make changes to our datasets in Direct Lake mode. that feature was released, and now we can do it, which means we can programmatically make changes to a dataset. We can go to a script and connect to the dataset, and we can even now write some changes. So it also opens up for third-party tools to be able to connect and modify this dataset. And that is, that really opens up a lot of flexibility. There is one current limitation here. Direct lake datasets that are created or modified by using these XML-based tools are currently not able to be edited with the web modeling feature anymore. So if you start using a programmatic approach, you force yourself into using that forever. So that's a limitation you should be aware about. But a very cool feature, very much needed feature. And finally, in the experience of Power BI, we have a little bonus feature, because I think there's been a lot of communication around it. Personally, I'm not sure if it's the biggest deal ever, but for visually creating reports, it is actually a very much asked for feature.
Bombshell feature.
Yeah. So we got finally smooth lines, which means we don't have to look at reports which have clunky edges on them, and they can look neat and aesthetically pleasing. So you can have opinions back and forth. Is this important? Is it not? It is asked for a lot, and it is something that report developers really like. And I actually think that Microsoft did a good job here researching the feature and treating it seriously, and not just implementing something that could create misleading data stories. I mean, that's always the risk with smoothing, but actually create something that took care of making sure that your top points do never go across the actual top points of your data sets, and in generally not suddenly being misleading, which smoothed graphs really have a tendency to be. So those were a bit of the most important news here, but we also brought here today probably our favorite news from the release. At least it's a.
You and I have spent some time looking at it.
We did. In a few years, there's been a term. Obviously, it's a marketing term, but someone called the modern data stack, which used to comprise of Snowflake and dbt. And the modern data stack, besides being a marketing term, gave people some flexibility to use a template way of handling things with dbt together with the warehouse capabilities of Snowflake, which was cool. And it didn't really connect with the products, neither with Power BI or with the Microsoft products so far. But with the release of Fabric, we actually got an alternative now for a modern data stack in Fabric, because we got the option now to include and integrate dbt together with our Fabric warehouse. So what enables this? Well, as opposed to the lakehouse in Fabric, the warehouse actually has this write engine for SQL. So any of the houses, any of the lakehouse or warehouses in Fabric you can read data with SQL, but for the warehouse, you're also able to write data. So we can use stuff like update statements, delete statements, things like that. And by enabling that, and by, in general, aligning with dbt, Microsoft has also developed a dbt adapter, which enables us to use the warehouse together with dbt, and finally able to explore the possibilities of what dbt can do. So now we can use dbt with Fabric. So the question to you, Jan, is why should we?
Why should we?
Why should we?
Well, there's a number of reasons for that, actually. What dbt brings to the equation in this case is actually that we can easily collaborate on code. Mm-hmm. We have source control. There's a number of features available from dbt that we can utilize on the Fabric platform now. We've got things like testing. We can actually write tests. We can write our own tests. We define them in the dbt framework, and we can have them executed on the Fabric platform. We have, as I mentioned earlier, version control, mm-hmm. which is great for collaboration and also documentation of your project. We have a thing called target profiles, or we have multiple target profiles, which makes it quite easy actually to switch between your development, test, and production environments, and actually compile and implement the same code on all of those platforms. There's a concept of modular code, which makes it easier to reuse code components throughout projects, or across projects, or within the same project. And finally, which is one of the real benefits, I think, from the DBT framework and the processes you work with there, is that you get automated documentation from the work that you're actually doing on the platform.
Very cool. So now there's no excuse not to do your documentation.
Not really.
I mean, if you made a project with DBT in a warehouse, how much time do you then have to spend to generate this automated documentation?
Well, some of the documentation, like relationship between some of the tables and the queries that you make, actually just comes from writing the code, which as a developer is a really great thing, I think.
It's just out of the box, you just click run, and then you get all
click
the
run, and then you automatically get you get quite a lot of the documentation of the project available. You can see what objects you have in the project. You can see lineage,
cool,
and relationships between the objects as well when you use it, which is a really great feature.
Nice. So we tried this out together.
Yep.
And we tried to build a simple architecture for how to handle this. So we ingested data with the data pipelines in Fabric into a data warehouse, and then we used DBT for all the transformation workloads.
Yep.
And was able to build basically a data warehouse that could rebuild itself within seconds.
We can make alterations, make transformations. We can deploy them to multiple endpoints. And this is just done with just a few commands actually in the DBT console app.
I still remember when we tested it out and we were still exploring the capabilities, we asked ourselves, what would it take? We built it. What would it take now to put it into productions? And we wrote one line of code, and it was then deploying to production, the whole data warehouse, building all the tables automatically, generating the documentation, making sure there was a proper lineage, orchestrating all the data transformations, and executing them.
Copying all the data.
So and copying all the data. So in a few minutes,
running the tests,
seconds, minutes, we had a full-fledged production data warehouse. From our work. So that was really cool. And you brought here a demo today to just explore a little bit of how it looks and what we can use it for.
There's a limited time available for showing the demo, but we will just go through some of the processes or some of the workflows involved with using DBT. It's one of the things you could mention is that DBT is an ETL tool. It's not a load tool. But there's a lot of workflow-wise, there's a lot of things to gain from using this platform. As Matthias mentioned, what we did to try and make a demo or a quick proof of concept of using this tool on the Fabric platform, we tried to build just a simple data warehouse where we load data from sources, we make some transformations on them, and we end up showing them as dimensions or facts in what you would normally have in an analysis platform.
So basically follow the standard architecture, or like the most common one. We had a raw layer where we landed the data. We had an enriched layer where we cleaned up the data. And finally, we had a curated layer or gold layer with the actual modeled data. And
exactly.
We did, of course, a simple demo, a simple proof.
Fairly simple, but still we managed to do some transformations.
So
all along the pipeline.
Let's see it.
Yeah. Well, the version of DBT that is currently supported for Fabric is the DBT Core, which is a Python library, and it's a console application.
Cool. So what are we looking at here?
In this screen, we're looking at my Visual Studio Code. I'm in Visual Studio Code. I've written some of the queries. We'll just go through the examples of the different tiers that we have. So one of the things that we do when we start referencing our sources is that we put in references. We save these as SQL files with the SQL extension, but in reality, they are a technology called Jinja 2 templates, which is a Python concept.
So we can see them as variables that then point to an actual data source instead of variables that have a value. So a variable that can have a data source, and which is really what's behind the scenes that making the auto documentation possible.
What helps us make the auto documentation.
Everything else about templating and standardizing is because we have this way of having variables in our data source. Cool.
From having defined the raw layer where we draw data from our sources, which are loaded into the data house, we make some transformations.
We actually do a bunch of transformations.
Yeah, we do a bunch of transformations in this script.
Yeah.
And again, in this layer, we are referencing the tables, the raw table, the object that we made before. And in this case, we're actually also referencing a snippet of code that inserts first order dates for
so we can also do
customers.
Joins and everything. And it's SQL at the bottom. All we have to do is write queries with a
you
little
write
bit
your
of
SQL
variables
basically the way you're used to, but you have to get used to using the references instead of the table names. That is basically the difference.
Cool. And then finally we turn it into
we can turn it into the final dimension solution. Yeah.
And that's the code we have to do. Of course, there's a few tweaks which you also have to do some YAML files. Most of it is auto-generated, but this is the core of a development workflow. Write your SQL queries, do only the value-adding activity and not everything that can be a bit tedious around that.
There's an option to enhance your documentation through the YAML files where you can actually elaborate further on.
Speaking of documentation, can you show us what this auto-documentation looks like?
I can indeed.
And
we can generate, you can see the command in the command line down here. You can do the docs generate and do the docs serve, and then you will get
nice. And we have a
documentation.
And what would be, if I wanted to get a quick overview of my platform, what would be the easiest way now to explore?
The interesting button for that would be the lineage graph, which we can take a look at here.
Wow.
So in this case, you can see the lineage of how the data flows through the objects that we have.
So if we look at DIM customer, I can see everything that's being used to create this one.
Yeah, I can see all of the tables or views involved in this.
Yeah. What if I was curious? I wanted to dig into the enriched customers.
You can go in and say, sorry.
the one with most transformations. I want to see what's happening with that.
It's as easy as right-clicking on the object on the page, and you can go to view documentation.
Nice.
And on this page,
so I can even hear there's an owner, type, language. They kind of have the most basics for me.
You get a lot of details about the objects. You get all of the columns, the data types.
Even with comments.
If you have a comment, you put comments into the YAML files. You get that out in this as well.
Nice.
And finally, you're also able to see the compiled output of your file.
But this still contains these variables, these template thingies. Can I also see the actual SQL code?
Indeed. That was the source, and this
is
the code.
Leading questions.
Yeah, you like that. I know that. And this is the interesting bit is here that I referenced actually a snippet of code which has been inserted as a separate CTE in this code. And also you can see the references that we put in the Jinja template as variables are now replaced with the actual table names.
Nice. So if I was worried about, I have this language, this Jinja influence on my SQL, what would it actually result in?
Yeah.
I can go here and I can
audit
what exact SQL
you can see the exact code that is put in production in the environment that you've.
That's awesome. What if I was concerned about something like data quality? Can I set up some?
Yeah, we mentioned earlier that again, we mentioned earlier that we were able to define tests in the YAML files. The tests can be either built-in tests. DBT comes with built-in tests for some things, most common things, but you can also write your own tests.
Nice.
This is an example where we've defined a test.
Oh, so we use in the bottom, we can see something called test unique here.
Yep.
But what does this actually do?
Well, I'm glad you asked.
Wow.
The compiled output is here, and you can actually see the SQL that is executed to perform the test.
So from here, I can actually see it's grouping by customer ID, then it's making a count over all the table, and it's making sure that all the customer IDs only exist one time. And if it was more than one, it means we have duplicates.
Yep.
And they're not unique.
Precisely.
And what happens if we have these?
If you have duplicates, you can actually you have an option for actually saving the failed data to a separate table where you can analyze the cause of the failures.
That's really cool.
So that is really neat.
I could take that table and build my own Power BI report with what are all the test quality issues I have with my data.
Exactly.
Based on that.
And you get the data to prove it.
Really powerful. I mean,
so that is really neat.
Cool. Great demo. So are there any anything else we should
there are a few other noteworthy features with the DBT framework. You also get a concept of snapshots, which is basically testing for slowly changing dimensions in your data. You can set that up per table. You can do that either on a timestamp or on a comparison of columns in the data. You're able to seed data. If you have CSV data, currently only CSV is supported, but if you have CSV data that you want to seed into the tables, you can do that. You've also got a concept of data freshness. If you've got like timestamps on your data, you can set up triggers to tell you how old your data is, and you can set up triggers to sort of say if you reach a threshold of a certain data age, you can either get a warning or a notification.
Cool. And one thing I forgot to ask you, DBT, what do I have to pay for it in the current form?
Well, in the current form where we're using the DBT core, it's actually free. You can download it. As like I mentioned, from a pip library. So you can download it and use it. And there's a lot of, since it's a Python library and it's open source, there's a lot of opportunities.
Nice.
That opens up quite a lot of possibilities for it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for a very thorough rundown of DBT.
Yeah.
And thank you for listening in. I hope that you got a little bit more excited about the warehouse feature. I at least got when I tried this out. It's certainly a very powerful offering and certainly can really compete with the Lakehouse in Fabric as well. And enjoyed the news tips and today's spotlight. And thank you for joining the studio today, Jan.
Thanks for having me.
And just enjoy your day, everyone out there.
Yeah. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.